My father engaged the smart locks on the dining room doors with a definitive electronic click, sealing every exit. He slid a cold, ceremonial blade across the white silk tablecloth until the sharp tip was mere millimeters from my chest. "Transfer the $7.6 million, Sydney," he whispered, his voice stripped of even a shred of paternal warmth, "or we find out exactly what your life is worth on the open market." I did not scream, I did not beg, I did not even blink. I just watched my sister, Madison, hunched over my laptop, her eyes manic with a greed so heavy it was visible. She was seconds away from trying to drain my account. They thought they were robbing me blind. They did not realize that the enter key she was about to press was the final signal to a federal task force. The FBI didn't just show up because of a button. They were already in the driveway, engines off, waiting for the signal from my encrypted feed. I took a slow, methodical sip of my wine. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm sitting here enjoying a quiet cup of coffee and watching the view, reflecting on how easily peace can shatter. It's a stark contrast to the high-stakes betrayal Sydney was navigating. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what your favorite drink is right now. Now, let's go back to the 48 hours before that blade. 48 hours before my father pointed that ceremonial blade at my chest, the only danger I faced was a lukewarm cup of espresso. I was standing in my kitchen in downtown San Francisco, a space that was everything my childhood home was not. It was quiet, it was paid for, and it was entirely safe. The morning sun hit the quartz countertops I had bought with my own hard-earned money, casting sharp, clean lines across the floor. I was in the middle of reviewing an encrypted case file on a high-level audit when my phone buzzed against the marble. The screen lit up with a single word that usually meant a massive withdrawal from my emotional reserves. Mother. I stared at it as the vibration rattled my coffee cup. We had not spoken in 6 months, not since I refused to co-sign another predatory loan for my sister Madison's latest failed influencer brand. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Logic told me to let it go to voicemail. Experience told me that if Patricia was calling at 8 in the morning, she was hunting and she would not stop until she caught something. I finally answered. "What is it, Patricia?" "Sydney, honey." Her voice was breathless, dripping with a sweetness that I knew, from experience, usually cost me at least 5 figures. "Is that how you answer your mother? We have been so worried about you." I leaned against my counter, analyzing her tone the way I analyzed complex spreadsheets. The pitch was a fraction too high. The pacing was rushed. She was lying. My parents did not do worry, they did leverage. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "We want to see you," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical, hushed whisper. "Your father and I, we have been doing a lot of thinking about Grandma Margaret. It has been a year since she passed, and we never really had a proper family dinner to honor her memory. We want you to come home this Friday to the Glass Box in Palo Alto, just us, family." I closed my eyes. They still saw me as the mousy teenager who would do anything for a scrap of affection. They did not know the person I was now. They did not know that at 32 years old, I was not just the quiet daughter anymore. I was a forensic cybersecurity specialist. I didn't just fix computers. I spent my days hunting down hackers and tracing millions in laundered assets through the dark web. I knew how to spot a hustle, and this was a textbook play. Then, Patricia added, almost too casually, that I should bring that little bank key fob of mine, the blue one. She claimed Gary found some old savings bonds of Grandma's in the attic, and they needed my trusty access to cash them out for the estate. The trap snapped shut right then. There were no bonds. I had audited Grandma Margaret's estate down to the last cent before she died. Everything was already in the $7.6 million blind trust I controlled. They did not want to honor my grandmother. They wanted the digital key to the trust. They were inviting me over, specifically to rob me. "Sydney, are you there?" I looked at my reflection in the window. My eyes were cold. If I said no, they would just keep coming. They would show up at my job or harass my colleagues. The only way to stop a parasite is to let it think it has found a vein, and then poison the blood. I am here, I said, my voice steady. I will be there, Mother, Friday night. I will bring the fob. I put the phone down and walked over to my workstation. I did not feel fear. I felt the clinical precision of a hunter who had just spotted movement in the brush. I opened a fresh coding window. It was time to build a mirror site. I cloned the bank's interface down to the last pixel, the soothing blue branding, the dual-factor authentication prompt. To anyone else, it would look like the portal to Grandma Margaret's millions. In reality, it was a data vacuum. Every keystroke and mouse click would be captured and instantly encrypted for the Federal Cybercrimes Division. As I typed the code for the fake transfer button, my hand cramped. I shook it out, and for a second, the blue light of the monitor blurred into the flashing blue lights of a police cruiser in a Connecticut rainstorm. I was 17 years old again. The smell of wet asphalt and burnt rubber filled my lungs. My parents' sedan was wrapped around a telephone pole. Madison was in the driver's seat, sobbing, reeking of cheap vodka. I had not even been in the car. I had walked down the road in the pouring rain because she had called me, screaming for help. My father, Gary, arrived before the paramedics. He did not check if we were hurt. He checked who was in the driver's seat. He looked at Madison, hysterical and drunk, and then he looked at me, sober and bleeding. Move, he ordered. Switch seats. Now, they dragged me into the driver's seat. My mother, Patricia, grabbed my face, her hands like frozen meat. She spoke to me in that soft, soothing voice she used to explain why I needed to finish my chores. Sydney, honey, she whispered, wiping blood from my eye. Madison has her beauty pageant next month. She has the scholarship. A felony record will ruin her life. You are strong. You can handle this. Do this for your sister. It is just a little sacrifice. They normalized the destruction of my future. They made it sound like a household chore, a simple act of sibling loyalty. These were the invisible chains they wrapped around me, a controlled environment where my only purpose was to absorb the impact of Madison's failures. I was 17, and I believed them. I believed that my only value was as a safety net, so I sat there. I took the breathalyzer. I took the blame. In this state, 17 is old enough to be branded for life. My father told me he'd handle the records and have them expunged when I turned 18. He lied. He left that felony active on my background check as a leash, a way to ensure I'd never fly too high without his permission. I lost my Ivy League scholarship because of the character concern on my record. I spent my first year of adulthood scrubbing industrial toilets while Madison went to parties on my parents' dime. I blinked, and the memory vanished. I was back in my penthouse, the code blinking on my screen. They had used my loyalty as a weapon then, but they had forgotten one fundamental rule. Every loyalty has an expiration date. I was not that bleeding 17-year-old anymore. I was the woman who audits the cartels. The trap was armed. The $7.6 million they wanted was about to become the reason they finally stopped existing in my world. The next morning, I sat across from Harrison in his glass-walled office, high above the financial district. Harrison was not just a lawyer. He was a shark in a three-piece suit who specialized in the kind of asset protection that usually involved non-disclosure agreements and offshore accounts. He looked at the schematic I had laid out on his desk, his eyebrows raising just a fraction of an inch. He told me this was aggressive. He suggested we could just file a restraining order or send a cease and desist letter. He said I did not have to walk into the lion's den. I looked at him, my expression as sterile as the glass surrounding us. I told him, a restraining order is just a piece of paper. My parents do not respect paper, they respect consequences. If I just block them, they will find a new way to burrow into my life, a new way to forge my signature or drain my energy. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. I didn't just write a check. I used an anonymous Delaware LLC to buy the distressed debt at 60 cents on the dollar. The lenders were thrilled to get liquid cash. They didn't care that they were handing me the leash to my sister's neck. I did not want to build a wall. I needed to nuke the bridge while they were still standing on it. Harrison stared at me for a long moment, then a slow, sharp smile spread across his face. He understood the math. If they willingly entered their credentials into a system designed to verify identity, and then attempted an unauthorized transfer of $7.6 million, that was not just a family dispute, it was a federal felony. He promised to have his contacts at the state police and the federal cybercrimes division on standby. I left his office and went straight back to work in the silence of my penthouse. The code was already written, but now it felt like a living thing. I wasn't just deploying a portal, I was weaving a digital noose. While they spent the night counting chickens that hadn't hatched, I was ensuring every digital tripwire was live, invisible, and lethal to their freedom. Every keystroke, every frantic mouse click, and every biometric scan from the high-definition webcam would be captured, packaged, and instantly transmitted to the authorities. I even embedded a GPS lock that would trigger the moment the transfer was initiated. This was not revenge. It was accounting. I was simply balancing a ledger that had been in the red since I was 17 years old. The gravel of the driveway at the Palo Alto house would soon crunch under my tires, sounding like the breaking of the very bones they had used to climb to the top. The trap was finalized. The hunt was on. The Victorian facade of the manor loomed over me, its windows like cold, judging eyes. It hadn't changed, but I had. My parents' house in Palo Alto was what I called the glass box, a sprawling, faux modern monstrosity with white columns and manicured hedges, designed to impress neighbors they secretly hated. To the untrained eye, it screamed high-tech luxury. To my eye, the clinical eye of an auditor, it screamed leverage. I could see the fine cracks in the stucco near the foundation and the peeling paint on the window frames that had not been touched in years. The house was exactly like them, a beautiful shell rotting from the inside out. Patricia opened the door before I could even knock. She was wearing a silk gown that looked 2 seasons old and smelled overpoweringly of lilies. It was a cloying, heavy funeral smell, used to mask the scent of damp plaster and the rising panic I could sense radiating off her. She did not hug me. She just ushered me into the foyer, where Madison was pacing like a caged animal. My sister looked like a cover model for a magazine about nervous breakdowns. She was wearing vintage Chanel, but her hair was fraying at the edges, and her eyes were darting around the room as if she expected the very walls to attack her. I did not take the bait when Madison tried to mock my business suit. I simply walked into the dining room. The table was set with the wedding china fine-bone porcelain with gold rims. They probably had not finished paying off, but the food served on it was pathetic. It was a dry, store-bought roast chicken and some wilted asparagus, the ultimate insult in a zip code where neighbors hire private chefs. It was a poverty of spirit served on a king's table. Gary was sitting at the head of the table, his skin gray and clammy. He poured himself a glass of wine with a hand that shook noticeably. We ate in silence for 3 minutes, the only sound, the scraping of silver forks against china, creating a tension so thick the air felt pressurized. Then Gary dropped the act. "Enough," he said. "We did not bring you here to talk about Grandma." Madison slammed her hand on the table, rattling the wine glasses. "We need the money," she blurted out. "Now, tonight." Gary looked at me, his eyes dead and hard. He revealed that Madison was in trouble, real trouble. She had borrowed $7.6 million from hard money lenders, not a bank, and they had called the note due this morning. They had put the house up as collateral, but the interest had ballooned beyond their control. Madison whispered through tears that if I did not pay by midnight, these people were going to do more than just take the house. They were going to hurt her. Gary demanded I open my laptop and transfer the debt from Grandma's trust. When I told them it was not my money to give, that it belonged to a foundation, Gary's voice turned into a growl. He walked to the double doors, and I heard the metallic click of the deadbolt sliding home. He dropped the key into his pocket, walked back, and picked up a cold, ceremonial blade. He did not brandish it. He simply set it down in front of me, the edge catching the light of the chandelier. This was the trap of normalized cruelty I had lived with my whole life. For my father, loyalty was not a bond. It was a currency he felt entitled to spend until my emotional and financial accounts hit zero. He truly believed I owed him this $7.6 million as repayment for 18 years of food and shelter. To him, my life was just a subscription he had already paid for, and he was simply demanding the service he thought he was owed. He whispered that nobody would leave until the transfer was complete. I looked at my mother and sister. They were not horrified. They were nodding their eyes hard with greed. I looked at the ceremonial blade, its polished surface reflecting the flickering light of the chandelier above us. Gary's hand was steady on the hilt, but his eyes were vibrating with a desperate, animalistic hunger. He thought he was pinning me down. He thought the threat of physical violence was the ultimate high ground. He didn't notice the pinhole camera in my brooch, broadcasting his every threat in 4K to the agents parked 2 houses down. He was holding a knife. I was holding a televised trial. He did not realize I was the one who had already conducted the autopsy on his soul. "You keep talking about Grandma Margaret's legacy," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence like a scalpel. "But I am a forensic auditor, Gary. I do not believe in stories. I believe in the paper trail, and I tracked every dollar, every policy number, and every forged signature dating back to that rainy night in Connecticut 15 years ago. That $7.6 million in the trust is not a gift from a grandmother who loved you. It is a payout." The room went deathly silent. Patricia's hand froze mid-air, her wine glass tilting until a single drop of dark red liquid hit the white cloth. Madison's manic grin faltered her breathing, becoming shallow and ragged. It was life insurance. I continued leaning forward until my chest was inches away from the steel tip of the blade. It was the payout from Madison's actual biological father. The man you killed in that drunk driving accident that you forced me to cover up. The man you and Patricia erased from the family tree so you could harvest his death to fund this glass box and Madison's vanity. Gary's face shifted from a sickly gray to a mottled, bruising purple. He tried to growl to reclaim the narrative, but the words died in his throat. I turned my gaze to Madison, who looked as though the floor had just vanished beneath her designer heels. "Did you know, Madison?" I asked, my tone clinical and cold. "Did you know that the father you worship did not save you that night? He did not switch our seats to protect your future. He did it to save himself from a vehicular homicide charge. He dragged a bleeding 17-year-old into the driver's seat to shield his own neck, and then he spent the next decade and a half feeding you with the blood money of the man he murdered." This was not a family dispute anymore. It was a liquidation. I watched as the reality of my words settled over them like a toxic fog. They had not just stolen my Ivy League scholarship and my youth. They were parasites living off the ghost of a dead man while calling me a worthless burden. Gary's hand began to shake so violently that the blade rattled against the table. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. He was not the patriarch anymore. He was just a small, desperate man holding a stolen knife, realizing that his cash cow had finally turned into his executioner. My compassion had officially hit a zero balance, and the interest on their debt was about to be paid in full. I knew what I had to do. I had to sell the fear. If I looked too calm, Gary would see the wire beneath the silk. I had to become the Sydney they remembered, the weak, pliable doormat who yielded to every shove. I let my lip tremble, forced my breath to shake, and squeezed my eyes until real tears blurred the vision of that knife. "Dad, please," I sobbed, my voice cracking perfectly. I could lose my license. I could go to jail for this. Patricia sneered her face, a mask of cold boredom. "You will be fine, Sydney. You hid the money, you can hide the crime." Madison pointed at me and cackled a sharp, ugly sound. Pathetic victim routine. "Just open the laptop, you boring little rat." Gary's hand hovered near the blade, his knuckles white. "Do it now." I slumped into the chair, reached into my bag with shaking fingers, and pulled out my laptop. They leaned in like vultures, their breath hot and smelling of cheap wine, as I clicked the bookmark labeled Trust Access. It was the mirror site I had built in the silence of my penthouse. Type the password, Madison hissed, her eyes fixed on the keyboard. I entered it slowly, one character at a time, making sure she could memorize every stroke. The fake dashboard loaded a sea of reassuring blue, displaying a balance of $7.6 million. Their collective breath caught in their throats. Restraint was gone. There was only the raw, naked pulse of greed. Transfer it, Gary ordered. All of it. To the offshore routing number, my hands shook as I hovered over the trackpad. I cannot do this, Gary. Madison shoved me aside, her designer shoulder hitting me with enough force to bruise. Move, she spat. She typed the routing number for her loan sharks herself, manic with the sudden rush of power. You tried to keep it for yourself, you selfish bitch, she said, looking at me with triumph. But I win. You should not have done that, I whispered, my voice no longer shaking. It was clinical now. Sharp as the blade on the table, Madison hit the enter key with a final, violent tap. But there was no confirmation page. The screen did not turn green. It flashed a blinding, strobe-like red. A high-pitched federal siren wailed from the smart home's integrated speakers, a sound so loud it felt like it was splitting the air. Red text screamed across the monitor, critical security alert, unauthorized access, biometric captured, GPS locked, law enforcement dispatched. They panicked, clicking frantically, swearing, demanding answers from a machine that was no longer listening. There is no money, I said, standing up and smoothing out my charcoal suit. The tears were gone. Grandma Margaret donated the entire trust to a veterans foundation months ago. This was never a bank portal. It was a data vacuum. Their faces twisted in horror as the laptop's green webcam light began to blink. Say hello to the Federal Cybercrimes Division, I said, my voice rising above the siren. They just watched you threaten a federal auditor and attempt wire fraud. You did not rob me. You just signed your own indictments. Madison collapsed into her chair. Gary tried to slam the laptop shut, but it was too late. Patricia just stared at me, all venom and disbelief. Within minutes, blue and red strobe lights illuminated the glass box. The sound of boots on gravel was followed by the smash of the front door being battered down. Federal agents swarmed the room, pinning Gary and Madison to the floor. As the officers cuffed Gary, he stared at me like I was the traitor. You killed this family. Patricia screamed as they dragged her toward the door. You are dead to us. You are not family. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single, laminated document. I told her quietly, as they forced her into the rain, I stopped being your family the night you left me bleeding in that Connecticut ditch. And Gary, you thought you were using this house as collateral for Madison's debt? They froze in the doorway, the rain soaking through their silk and Chanel. I pulled out the quitclaim deed you signed a decade ago to dodge the IRS. You thought you were being clever, hiding assets from the government, but you didn't realize that by signing that deed, you were handing me the keys to your prison cell. Madison didn't just start drowning this morning. She's been sinking for a year. I've been quietly buying up every piece of her high-interest debt as it hit the secondary market, waiting for the moment she consolidated it all into this one final, fatal loan. I didn't just buy your debt 6 months ago. I've been your landlord for half a year, Gary. You are not being arrested in your home, Gary. You are being arrested for trespassing in mine. That was the real death blow, the realization that they had spent years mocking the boring daughter while living in a house she provided. This was the positive revenge of success. My professional skill, the very thing they called boring, was the engine that had finally ground them to dust. I returned to my penthouse in San Francisco, where the silence no longer felt like a void I needed to fill with work, but like a luxury I had finally earned. The glass box in Palo Alto was gone, sold to a developer who intended to tear it down and build something with an actual foundation. A few weeks ago, a letter arrived from a federal correctional facility. I recognized Gary's shaky, blocky handwriting on the envelope. He was pleading for a specialized lawyer for a second chance, for me to remember that we were blood. I did not open it. I did not need to read his words to know they were just another attempt to overdraft an emotional account I had closed forever. I stood on my balcony, watching the fog roll over the Bay Bridge, and held the letter over a small ceramic bowl. I watched the flame catch the corner, the paper curling and blackening, until his demands were nothing but gray ash blowing into the San Francisco wind. I have come to realize that we are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, forged in DNA. But that is a beautiful lie, used by predators to keep their prey in place. Family is not a DNA sample. It is a safety record. It is the history of how people treat you when you have nothing to give them but your presence. If the people who raised you see you as a cash cow or a sandbox for their own mistakes, your only moral obligation is to protect yourself. Forgiveness is a powerful tool, but it is not a requirement for healing. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is to nuke the bridge while the people trying to destroy you are still standing on it. I spent 15 years believing I was the boring, invisible daughter. But my career was never boring. It was the very skill set that allowed me to audit my own life and find the courage to liquidate the toxic assets holding me back. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you have ever been the one expected to fix your family's messes while they ignored your achievements, remember that loyalty has an expiration date. You are not a safety net for people who refuse to learn how to walk on their own. The best revenge is not the bars of a prison cell. It is the absolute silence of a life they no longer have access to. I have traded $7.6 million of blood money for a lifetime of peace, and it was the best trade I have ever made. I sit now with a cup of tea, in one of Grandma Margaret's cups, looking at a horizon that belongs entirely to me. If you have ever been the one who had to be strong so someone else could be reckless, share this video. We are building a community of survivors who finally chose themselves. Like and follow for more stories of justice.